watching the National News Desk, America's News Now.
They take on this identity that I have to do something violent on behalf of others to communicate this message.
A terror attack in New Orleans sending shockwaves throughout the nation. How the attacker may have been radicalized.
And that's when I saw all the dead bodies on the ground. I can do nothing but thank God and cry.
Shot and survived. A New Orleans victim recounts the horrifying moment when the attacker slammed through the streets. And later, the fact-check team breaks down the numbers when it comes to terrorism on U.S. soil. How many attacks have taken place since 9/11? From the nation's capital, this is the National News Desk, America's News Now. I'm Dee Dee Gatton. Thank you for joining us on this Weekend Edition. We are continuing to follow the terror attack in New Orleans, as well as 4 other big stories we've been following this week. Biden clamps down on illegal immigration following political pressure. New numbers showing a drop in migrant encounters. And Ukraine gets more military aid from the U.S., where the funds and supplies are coming from. Plus, the new Congress vowing to take a new direction. The first laws Republicans could pass under a trifecta. And later, bird flu infection spreading in certain animals, where the FDA is keeping an eye on dairy products. First, new warnings about the terror group known as ISIS or the Islamic State, with the FBI saying the New Orleans terrorist was an ISIS sympathizer. The National News Desk, Christine Frizzell, reports a group once called defeated is still finding followers to this day.
The horrific attack in New Orleans on New Year's Day brought a chilling revelation about the suspect.
An ISIS flag was located on the trailer hitch of the vehicle.
While Samsud Dinjabar was born and raised in Texas, the ISIS flag and apparent video he posted discussing plans to kill his family and join ISIS resurrected questions about the terror group, considered by some to be defeated.
The short answer is ISIS never went away. They shifted what we perceive them as, but they're still out there activating that grievance and providing that narrative to get people on a violent path to radicalize.
Terrorism expert Timothy Clancy says the group has had success preying on people, including Americans, online, finding most success with those who believe their problems are someone else's fault.
They take on this identity that I have to do something violent on behalf of others to communicate this message.
The New Orleans suspect's ISIS sympathies prompting President-elect Donald Trump to post, "Radical Islamic terrorism and other forms of violent crime will become so bad in America that it will become even hard to imagine or believe," blaming President Biden's, quote, open border policies, although both the New Orleans suspect and the suspect in the Cybertruck explosion in Las Vegas were citizens born here and had served in the U.S. military. Trump has vowed to begin the largest mass deportation program in history in just a few weeks, and has often pointed to crime committed by migrants and the massive increase in those coming to the country on the terror watch list. Those arrested between ports of entry at 0 in 2019, rising to a shocking 169 in 2023 and 103 in 2024. Here on Capitol Hill, some are using the attacks as a reason to try to push for swift confirmation of Donald Trump's national security picks, including his controversial choice of Pete Hegseth as Secretary of Defense, though there's no indication if the sense of urgency argument will factor in. I'm Christine Frizzell for the National News Desk.
This weekend, we are also starting to hear from some of the victims in the New Orleans terror attack. The National News Desk, Andrea Ramey, spoke with a woman who was shot and survived the tragedy.
Alexis Scott Wyndham rang in the new year on Bourbon Street with 7 other friends from Mobile. She says they were getting ready to grab a bite to eat before calling it a night when chaos erupted in the street.
We heard something go boom, boom, boom. And people were screaming, and I looked to the left, and a truck was coming down like the street, and he was halfway on the sidewalk too. He was just running people over like it was nothing.
She says the truck the terrorist was driving hit her and knocked her to the ground. At first, Alexis thought maybe the truck ran over her foot or she broke her ankle. But as she tried to get up and run away, she saw blood pouring out. Her best friend by her side FaceTimed with Alexis' mother, Trifina.
Once she called me and I looked at it, I said, "That's a bullet wound." I said, "Look, get that other sock you got on the other foot, take it off, tie it up tight, so that she won't be bleeding so heavy so bad.
Alexis says about that time, a Good Samaritan and his girlfriend offered to take Alexis and her friend to the hospital.
And that's when I saw all the dead bodies on the ground. I can do nothing but thank God and cry at the same time.
She says her friend, Brandon Whitsett, a Viger graduate, was also injured and is still in the hospital in New Orleans. She believes the truck hit him. She says 2 of her other friends were also hurt, but not seriously.
I'm just thankful. Like, it could have been worse. Like, when people was coming to the hospital, they were looking for their family members, and some of them weren't even there. They were dead. So they was just telling them, like, sorry for your loss, and they would just bust out crying. So I couldn't do nothing but thank God that I only got shot in my foot.
I did not want to be one of them parents that calling me to bury my baby. That's what I didn't want to see. I'm just glad that you called me and said it was her foot and not her dead. Because you see the video there, people are dead, ran over, died. So I'm just glad that she is still alive. By the grace of God, He protected her.
Right now, the FBI is in the process of investigating the attack in New Orleans as an act of terrorism. The fact-check team's Emma Withrow joins us now. And first of all, Emma, what constitutes an act of terrorism according to federal officials?
Yeah, so the FBI, they define terrorism, either domestic or international, as the unlawful use of force or violence against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government or civilian population in furtherance of political or social objectives. So in the statement the FBI released on the New Orleans attack, they said that there was an ISIS flag in the attacker's truck, which is why they're now trying to figure out his possible affiliations with that terrorist organization or others.
And which factors have played a role in the way that terrorism threats have evolved here in the U.S.?
Yeah, there's a number of factors at play here. So according to the FBI, these threats have really evolved from larger groups like Al-Qaeda to more lone offenders, these types of attacks. The FBI says that these attackers are usually radicalized online and then become pretty violent pretty quickly. So social media has also given both international and domestic terrorists direct access to Americans, and ISIS in particular actually encourages their sympathizers to carry out simple attacks wherever they are, kind of like this one.
Emma, thank you. Yeah. And for more on this topic, Emma will be back to break down the numbers on terrorist attacks here in the U.S. and whether they've gone up or down since 9/11. The Taliban says it will close all non-governmental groups in Afghanistan that employ women. It comes 2 years after they told NGOs to suspend the employment of Afghan women, allegedly for not wearing the Islamic headscarf correctly. In a letter published to social media, the Taliban's economic minister said NGOs that don't comply will lose their license to operate in Afghanistan. A Taliban leader also ordered new and existing buildings not to have windows in places where a woman might be seen. Illegal border crossings dropped to their lowest level of the Biden administration in November. New data from Customs and Border Protection report 94,000 encounters at the southern border for the month. That's down roughly 12,000 from October and well short of the peak, over 300,000 last December. The Biden administration has tightened clamps on illegal immigration as there's political pressure. President-elect Trump vows to be more aggressive and threatens mass deportations of those already in the country without permission. Ukraine is getting another $5.9 billion in military and budget assistance from the U.S. The funds are coming partly from U.S. stockpiles and partly from the final aid package of President Biden's time in office. Biden is trying to surge as much aid as possible to the war-torn country before President-elect Trump enters the White House. Trump says he'll end the war when he takes the oath, sparking concerns on both sides of the aisle.
The Ukraine situation is still extremely serious. We need to be with Ukraine. It's the front line of defense for democracy.
And the White House says the security assistance will help Ukraine bolster long-term air defense supplies, artillery, and other weapon systems. The 119th Congress will have a new look when the next two-year term starts. National correspondent Matt Gelka takes a look at what the priorities are on Capitol Hill with Republicans in control.
Republicans secured the trifecta for at least the next 2 years. Donald Trump won back the White House. Republicans held control of a slim majority in the House, and they flipped the Senate. Ambitious GOP plans in the early parts of Trump's presidency include extending previous Trump tax cuts, border security measures to carry out the promise of mass deportations, and domestic energy policies.
We got to get the border closed for all the reasons we've talked about. We've got to get domestic energy cranked up, back up again for not just our own security, but for the well-being of the world in that sense.
Secure the borders and restore fiscal sanity to the budget. I mean, those are the two things that are killing our country.
The Senate will have to contend with battles over confirming Trump cabinet nominees, along with trying to implement the agenda. Unorthodox picks, including Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for Health Secretary and Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence, could bring fireworks to nomination hearings. Congressional plans could hinge on a very slim House Republican majority, and this number is going to get even thinner come January. Florida Republican Matt Gaetz has already resigned and doesn't plan to take the oath, and 2 other Republicans are planning on joining Trump's administration, meaning Republicans will have only a 217 to 215 edge over Democrats for at least a couple of months. That number means a united group of Democrats, along with a single Republican defection, could sink any legislation that comes to the House floor until those vacancies are filled.
Yes, do the math. We have nothing to spare. But all of our members know that. We talked about that today, as we do constantly, that this is a team effort, that we've got to all row in the same direction.
House Democrats are already stressing the importance of showing up as they try to fight back against Trump's agenda.
It's important for every member to come to work and to do their job. That's what we're telling our caucus. Their attendance is incredibly important.
Incoming Senate Majority Leader John Thune may have summed everything up with his short post accompanying the chamber's 2025 calendar. Thune told his members, "Get ready to work." Reporting in Washington, I'm Matt Gelka for the National News Desk, America's News Now.
More than 9 million American workers are getting a raise this year. Starting January 1st, 21 states and 48 cities and counties raised their minimum wage. Blue areas like California and New York City raised their minimum wage to $16.50, while some red states like Arizona and Ohio are also seeing increases. The federal minimum wage, which hasn't been increased since 2009, remains at $7.25 per hour. Experts are predicting much of the same for the housing market in 2025. According to Zillow, buying a home this year was competitive for 2 reasons: lack of affordable options and elevated mortgage rates. And those factors aren't expected to change. Zillow predicts mortgage rates to stay over 6% for all of 2025. Right now, 60% of people with a mortgage have a rate below 4%. And health officials say COVID-19 levels are rising in the U.S. Levels began ramping up in early December after unusually low activity in recent months, according to wastewater surveillance data from the CDC. Data shows there was nearly 3 times as much COVID circulating in the U.S. last week compared with the first week of December. Experts are concerned rates may continue to climb following holiday travel and gatherings. And federal health officials are now collecting samples of aged raw cow's milk cheese across the nation to test for the bird flu. The FDA said it plans to collect 300 samples of raw cow's milk cheese that has been aged for at least 60 days. Samples will be tested with a PCR test, which looks for genetic material from the virus and will be completed within 1 week of collection. Still ahead, disinformation crackdown, the groups the U.S. is sanctioning for spreading lies about American candidates last election. And later, debt ceiling deadline, when the U.S. could reach the end of its credit limit and what the new Congress could do to curb overspending in Washington. The U.S. has imposed sanctions on groups in Iran and Russia over attempted election interference. The sanctions target the Moscow-based Center for Geopolitical Expertise, saying the group spread disinformation about American candidates. The Cognitive Design Production Center, a subsidiary of Iran's paramilitary Revolutionary Guard, was also named. Officials say the group has worked since at least 2023 to incite political tensions in the U.S. Russia and Iranian officials have repeatedly rejected claims they tried to influence the 2024 election. And Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has warned Congress that extraordinary measures will be necessary as early as January 14th unless Congress raises or suspends the debt ceiling. But conservatives and President-elect Trump may not be on the same page. Joining Angelo Brown to discuss is Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union, Brandon Arnold.
Well, right now, the U.S. is sitting on around $36 trillion in debt. And, you know, the debt ceiling, of course, is the amount of money that we can borrow in order to pay our bills. Now, we have been down this road, Brandon, so many times in the past. But you had heard what Janet Yellen said about the 14th. There's a window here, the 14th through the 23rd. Just once again, go over for us. What do you think is going to happen? And what happens if it doesn't get raised?
Yeah, I think what's most likely to happen here is we're going to let these measures start to kick in. Essentially, this is Yellen shifting finances around within the federal government in order to pay our obligations, like our debt service payments. That will extend the amount of time that Congress and the president have, probably till this summer, probably till about June, though we don't know precisely when. So that gives us some flexibility to hopefully come together and put a deal in place that starts to get our nation's finances back on track, something that Trump and congressional Republicans can agree upon.
So once again, elected leaders, they will have a window in order to get something worked out. But this is a little bit different this time because you have Republicans who are in control of the House, they control the Senate, they're in control of the White House. And I remember Trump said in December that the debt ceiling should be thrown out. On the flip side, you have some conservatives who are now saying that Trump will need to agree to like some deep spending cuts in order for them to agree to raise the debt limit. What is the better option here? And could you ever see any point where we would get rid of this whole debt ceiling in the future?
I don't think we should get rid of the debt ceiling. You know, that's essentially the credit card cap that we have, the spending cap that you have on the nation's credit card. So if we got rid of that, that would just empower future politicians to spend whatever the heck they wanted without concern of the implications here. So I think we should keep the debt ceiling cap. But at the same time, you know, we look back into recent history, Republicans negotiated a deal under Obama, put spending caps in place in 2011. Last year did the same thing with President Biden. So I think now that we have Republican control, there ought to be deeper cuts as a condition of lifting that cap on a temporary basis.
Let's talk about real quickly extending the Trump 2017 tax cuts. How big of a priority is that? How much could it add to the deficit? What are we looking at here?
Yeah, so most of the tax cuts, like the lower rates for individuals and small businesses, the expanded child tax credit, all that expires at the end of this year. So it needs to be extended. We can't afford to have a massive multi-trillion-dollar tax hike on American families right now. But you're right, there are huge deficit implications. It could be $4.5 trillion or even more. So we need to find ways to cut spending, to get rid of special interest tax provisions, things that are unneeded, like EV tax credits and renewable energy production tax credits. Get rid of those credits in order to reduce the overall price tag of this package. Make sure we preserve those tax cuts without busting the budget and without sacrificing economic growth and job creation.
All right, Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayer Union, Brandon Arnold, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Angela.
Killer whales returns near Seattle. The new rules for boaters to help keep the animals around. And later, shaken up but safe. A mechanical issue causes an emergency plane landing in Ohio. Why one passenger says she's reluctant to fly again. This is the National News Desk, America's News Now. We have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering issues that matter to you. From new boater laws in Washington state meant to protect orcas to a heartwarming story between two best friends in Ohio. We're taking the pulse of America, but we start with a flight that was quickly forced to make an emergency landing in Ohio.
SkyWest Flight 4644 was set to leave West Virginia International Yeager Airport in Charleston with a full house on board. But right off the bat, there were some issues in getting up in the sky.
I smelled something, and it smelled like a burning smell. And when I smelled that, my body like kind of went into shock. My body was like, oh, this isn't good. And so everyone was just kind of looking around, and I looked at the guy beside me and I asked him if he smelled that, and he was like, yeah, I smell that.
Suddenly, the smoke alarms in the plane went off, and the passenger says the staff on board started to panic with them.
She seemed to be panicking, so I knew it wasn't good. Like the way she was acting, it was like, okay, this is a real life situation.
The plane was forced to land at the Dayton International Airport in Ohio, and oxygen masks were dropped from above. The passenger we spoke to said she saw others starting to pray.
Not ready to get back on an airplane right now, but I'm hoping, like, with therapy that I'll be able to, like, work through it.
Like thousands of others, Jessica Hawes was desperately wishing and waiting to find her match. Hawes was suffering from chronic kidney disease and needed a kidney to save her life. Megan Schultz is Hawes' friend and college sorority sister, and now is a part of her friend's life forever.
I have some exciting news for you. I have a match.
Oh, just the weight has been lifted. It's Megan, she saved my life.
Flash forward 6 months later, and Jessica received the best Christmas gift she could ever ask for, a new kidney. Megan says Jessica and her family are now her family, bonded together forever.
It's so wild. It's like wild to think about, like a piece of me is working in her, and it's working so well, and it's just incredible to think about that.
Jessica says Megan is now her angel, godsend, and hero.
I just love you so much, and I can't wait to see where your life goes and where you go, and I can't wait to be part of it.
I mean, whales are one of the great features of boating around here.
Being close to a whale is a life-changing experience. Never gets old.
Boating his entire life, John Gardner's seen southern resident whales, transient bigs, grays, and humpbacks. Washington's new law will keep Gardner and all others out on the water 1,000 yards away from southern resident killer whales.
So it's not about having the perfect measurement here. It's about changing the mindset to give these whales as much space as possible.
Julie Watson, the state's leader for its killer whale policy, tells me this new law creates a uniform policy for everyone on the water, commercial, recreational, even kayakers and paddleboarders.
You know, you're going to do your best to try to look to see if you can see any of the breaches ahead of time, any of the spray coming off of them, to try to keep your distance, but they can come up for sure.
I think we'd like to keep them around if we can.
Right now, the bird flu is mostly contained to birds, but it could spread to other animals. The urgent warning about the virus found in some pet foods when we come back. A health alert for pet owners. LA County Public Health again warning against feeding dogs and cats raw pet food after bird flu was found in product samples. Monarch Raw Pet Food is now the brand under investigation. They added residents should also avoid consumption of all raw milk and raw meat products and not feed these to their pets. The pet food warning was first issued last week following the death of an Oregon cat. Northwest Naturals voluntarily recalled those products. And the state of Wyoming has agreed to sell a 1 square mile piece of land inside the boundaries of Grand Teton National Park for $100 million. The so-called Kelly parcel sits in a key wildlife migration corridor. The deal will allow the federal government to protect the 640-acre piece of land from development. The financing for the purchase was the result of a public-private partnership. And babies born this year will be the first of the new generation Beta. Members will be born between 2025 and 2039, according to Australian social researcher Mark McCrindle. McCrindle says they will experience artificial intelligence and automation in every aspect of life. By 2035, Gen Beta is expected to make up 16% of the global population. And ahead in our next half hour, a series of trends gets TikTok in legal trouble. Why the platform is being sued by Venezuela over the deaths of 3 children. You're watching the National News Desk, America's News now. You can catch us live weekdays from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time, and anytime online at thenationaldesk.com. We'll be right back. You're watching the National News Desk, America's News Now.
They're ready for anything.
We've been preparing for large crowds. That's what we specialize in.
D.C. preps for 3 major events. The heightened security measures going into place now.
I would never be okay with a school lunch that I wouldn't feed to my own children. We should all demand that.
Toxic chemicals found in school lunches, how our reporting is sparking change in Washington. And later, millions of Americans getting a tax break in the new year. Which 9 states are slashing individual income rates? From the nation's capital, this is the National News Desk, America's News Now. I'm Dee Dee Gatton, and this weekend we are tracking the fallout from the terror attack in New Orleans. The tragedy comes days before 3 major D.C. events, the anniversary of January 6th, President Jimmy Carter's funeral, and President-elect Trump's inauguration. The National News Desk, Brad Bell, reports on the heightened security measures now going into place.
Law enforcement agencies in D.C. are always on alert for vehicle attack. Streets around the Capitol and White House are protected by permanent visible and pop-up barriers, with officers standing watch 24/7. And now, as the city prepares for 3 successive national security events which will draw crowds to the city, D.C.'s police chief is stressing much more will be done to prevent trouble.
We've been preparing for large crowds. That's what we specialize in here in the District of Columbia at the Metropolitan Police Department.
Already, the entire Capitol complex is surrounded by miles of temporary anti-scale fencing in advance of Monday's congressional certification of the presidential election, January 6th. After that, the state funeral for President Jimmy Carter will require security around the Washington National Cathedral, and then that line of fencing around the Capitol will grow to surround much of the area around the Capitol, the Mall, Pennsylvania Avenue, and the White House for the presidential inaugural.
We'll continue to work very closely with our local and state partners to see if there are any critical threats to the district, and if there are, we will posture ourselves accordingly.
We've got to look at what we can do to enhance.
In recent testimony before a Senate committee, U.S. Capitol Police Chief Tom Manger stressed his force is better prepared to defend the Capitol campus than on January 6th 4 years ago. There are 360 more officers, and all of them are now equipped with riot gear.
There's a level of confidence in our officers, especially our CDU officers, that they're ready for anything, and that when they're really being tested, they'll look to the left, they'll look to the right, and they'll see that they have adequate resources, adequate people there to accomplish whatever we need to accomplish in keeping this campus safe.
The recent attack in New Orleans marks the latest act of terrorism on U.S. soil, and the FBI believes the attacker was influenced by ISIS. Emma Withrow from the Fact Check team joins us now, and unfortunately, these terror attacks are nothing new here in the U.S. I know you dug into the numbers. How many have we seen since 9/11?
Yeah, so I sifted through just decades and decades of data on the global terrorism database dating all the way back to the 1970s, and there's been at least 161 fatal terrorist attacks here in the U.S. Since 9/11.
And tell us more about these attacks that were listed in the database, because I understand they only went back so far.
Yeah, they only went back so far, and they only had the most recent data up until 2020. But among those attacks listed, 9/11 was obviously the most fatal, with almost 3,000 killed. Beyond that, the 2017 Las Vegas Music Festival shooting was the second deadliest, with 60 people killed and 850 injured. And then the 2016 Orlando nightclub shooting actually closely follows those, with 50 people killed and 50 injured.
Were the perpetrators of those attacks associated with any specific terror groups?
They were, yeah. It was interesting how the database kind of listed all of those out, all of those people's affiliations, the attackers. So Al-Qaeda obviously orchestrated the attacks on 9/11. We know that. The global terrorism database also describes the Orlando nightclub attacker as a jihadi-inspired extremist. And then the gunman at the Vegas Music Festival was labeled a suspected anti-government extremist, is how they described it.
It's just horrible that we're having to talk about this. But Emma, thank you. A lot of research. And for more on this Fact Check Team topic, including links to their sources, scan the QR code on your screen or visit thenationaldesk.com. Looking at crime in America, the number of murders across the nation declined sharply for much of the year. From January through October, the U.S. saw a nearly 16% drop in murders compared to 2023, and that's according to the Real-Time Crime Index. Other crime categories also saw declines, including car thefts, which fell by about 20%. The number of rapes and aggravated assaults also fell slightly. This week, smugglers abandoned 2 migrant children at the southern border in Texas before turning back to Mexico. The girls from El Salvador only carried a note with an address and phone number. The incident taps into growing concerns about unaccompanied minors crossing into the U.S. Earlier this year, a report from HHS found 32,000 unaccompanied minors did not show up for immigration hearings over the last 5 years. Many of their locations remain unknown. Venezuela's Supreme Court has issued a $10 million fine against TikTok in connection with viral video challenges that allegedly led to the deaths of 3 children. The judge ruled TikTok acted in a negligent manner by failing to implement the necessary measures to prevent the spread of the challenges. Venezuelan officials previously cited video that involves sniffing substances or taking tranquilizer pills. TikTok was given 8 days to pay the fine. It's also required to open a Venezuelan office to ensure content complies with local laws. This fall, Spotlight on America released exclusive test results showing what's really inside your kid's school lunch. From pesticides to heavy metals, harmful toxins that could impact developing children. Now, our reporting is getting traction in Congress, where a key senator is planning to take action. National investigative correspondent Lisa Fletcher reports.
U.S. Senator John Fetterman can't believe we're even having a conversation about the safety of school lunches.
I would never be okay with a school lunch that I wouldn't feed to my own children. We should all demand that.
Families across America rely on school lunches to nourish their children. In fact, 30 million kids a day depend on them. But there's a blind spot that we uncovered when we sent school lunches to a testing lab. We found dozens of pesticides, glyphosate, heavy metals, arsenic 6 times higher than what the FDA allows in apple juice.
It's crazy, and this is what I'm saying. Pure food should be the baseline, and that's an important conversation.
One that was launched by U.S. Senator Cory Booker, who introduced groundbreaking legislation this fall to address dangerous additives, chemicals, pesticides, and heavy metals in school lunches.
I think it is more of a crisis than most Americans can even begin to realize.
Senator Fetterman has joined Booker as a co-sponsor of the bill as Washington braces for a shift in power. But Fetterman says on this topic, there's no room for a change in priorities. And with Robert Kennedy Jr., the frontrunner for Secretary of Health and Human Services, Fetterman sees opportunity rather than opposition.
We have an issue and a problem, and I hope Mr. Kennedy could see your report and just realize, like, hey, you've got people of the other party that are eager. I'm inviting him, hey, we can work together on that.
And there is, no doubt, a lot to work on. Simple school lunches, things like pizza and salad, contained unseen, largely unregulated toxins that have been tied to developmental delays, liver disease, even cancer. Our school lunch tests revealed alarming amounts of harmful pesticides, as many as 38 in one lunch. 23 just on 1 cup of strawberries. Lead, a toxic metal that has no safe level, was detected in every one of our samples. Glyphosate, the world's most used herbicide, commonly recognized as the product Roundup, which is facing litigation over health effects, was also found in every one of our samples. Addressing the problem means confronting the industry alliances that often divide lawmakers.
Sometimes people want to talk about the shiny things. What really can matter more is like the kinds of things that's part of our kids' lives for 5 days a week for 12 years during education. I'm grateful to be a part of this dialogue.
Fetterman is adding to his longstanding fight to make sure all kids have access to school lunches, free of charge, free of stigma, and now free of toxins.
And I promise you, I'm going to activate my network to promote this and to have this. And my dream or my ideal would be that the new administration and the people that are going to be part of this conversation want to take it as seriously as we have.
For Spotlight on America, I'm Lisa Fletcher.
Cyber criminals have now released files they hacked from Rhode Island's IT system for health and benefits programs onto the dark web. That's according to Governor Daniel McKee. The leak impacts about 650,000 people's sensitive information like names and social security numbers. The system, RI Bridges, hacked by the group Ryan Cipher, hosts programs that include Medicaid and SNAP. McKee said that Deloitte, the company maintaining Bridges, has been in contact with the hackers.
We'll let the investigation determine, whether we were protected as well, or whether Deloitte. Remember, Deloitte's managing this system, right? So certainly the heavy responsibilities on them.
And the state is working with Deloitte to determine the people impacted. They'll be sent a letter with instructions on how to access free credit monitoring. Some Americans are getting a break on their taxes this year, with 9 states reducing their individual income rates. It's part of a recent push to cut state taxes that started during the pandemic. Here's a look at the states getting cuts. If you take a look at this map, Indiana and Louisiana are getting the lowest rates at just 3%, while New Mexico is lowering its bracket thresholds. Meantime, West Virginia is cutting rates because of a revenue surplus. And more major companies reverse remote work policies in the second half of 2024. According to the Flex Index, the percentage of companies requiring 3 office days per week jumped from 19 to 28%. Miami and New York saw more people visiting the office than San Francisco, which barely passed 50%. Seattle is also seeing a shift, with 50,000 Amazon employees returning to the office in the new year. Still to come here, our team of correspondents breaks down this week in Washington, from growing national security concerns to Republicans' new agenda.
Welcome back. Our Washington Bureau covers the nation's capital every day, and our team of correspondents reports on the important issues facing the country and how they impact you. The deadly New Orleans New Year's Day terror attack raising questions about security around events where there are large crowds. National correspondent Matt Galka, tell us about that.
Yeah, Steve, obviously the fallout's still ongoing from that one, and obviously anxiety's still pretty high with this New Year's Eve terror attack happening just days ago. Look, investigators are still trying to piece everything together, but really what we do know is that the barriers that are set up on Bourbon Street, the bollards as they're called, they were under repair as they're getting ready for other big events in New Orleans coming in the next month or so, including Mardi Gras and the Super Bowl. And so what the police department apparently had done is they had a police car stationed there where a bollard or barrier, basically a roadblock, would be to prevent this kind of vehicular attack from happening. And obviously it wasn't enough. One car wasn't enough. If anybody out there is familiar with big events in other cities have employed different things. You think of New York or Washington, D.C., like dump trucks or bigger barriers at focal points to try and ward off just this kind of attack. Because unfortunately, a car ramming into a crowd of people is not new. It's not new in this country, and it's not new around the world. And it's a tactic that terrorist groups use around the world, and that federal agents have warned local law enforcement about for quite some time because of, one, its barbaric nature, and two, just how unskilled you can be and still carry out a massive attack like this. A joint intelligence bulletin from earlier in the month, December 6th, had warned that vehicle ramming could be a possibility as we approach the holidays, and there are soft targets of large groups of people that are basically unsecured. They had warned local officials around the country about this. And unfortunately, we saw that come to fruition. Now, a lot of members on Capitol Hill they want answers. They're demanding answers from the feds. They want complete transparency. So we are far from getting to the very end of this as the investigation unfolds. But I think once the dust truly settles, the focal point is going to be on security. What went wrong? What were the lapses? Why was the truck able to get onto the sidewalk of Bourbon Street and carry out this massive attack, this horrible attack? And so all of those questions are going to be asked, especially as we get rolling with the new Congress and a new administration in the White House.
Yeah, and the attack also raising concerns about Americans' ties or sympathies with a terror group that we thought was not going to have much of an impact in the United States these days. National correspondent Christine Frizzell, what have you learned?
Yeah, certainly the suspect and his ties to ISIS is putting the spotlight on this question of, how powerful is ISIS? We thought, in some ways they were defeated, and they were, back in 2018, militarily defeated in Iraq and Syria. But I spoke to a terrorism expert, Timothy Clancy from START, University of Maryland, START, and he told me, this is typical that even though a group might be defeated militarily, they still gather sort of in the shadows, and they're able to recruit people. And one of the easiest and best tools that they have is, of course, online, but they operate finding people who have a grievance or perceived grievance. They have problems in their lives and they blame others. They consider themselves a victim, and they are radicalized online to carry out a violent attack in the name not only of their own, disdain for life, but they think that they're helping others or sending an important message to others. And that seems to be the case with this suspect in New Orleans. Again, it is an American citizen born and raised in the state of Texas, served in the U.S. military. But of course, people who want to raise questions about the safety and security of America, people like President-elect Donald Trump, are using this incident to raise questions about President Biden's border policies, President-elect Trump using his mass deportation program once again as a reason to try to prevent people with ISIS ties from coming into this country. Obviously, this person was already living here, was born here, but it is putting the question and the issue of ISIS back into the spotlight once again.
Right, and terrorism, another issue for the new president-elect and a new Congress, which was sworn in and this past week, and a president-elect going to be inaugurated in 2 weeks. National correspondent Audra Elnishar, what do the newly in charge Republicans have planned other than focusing on terrorism?
Well, whether they want to or not, first and foremost, lawmakers are going to have to figure out how to address the nation's borrowing limit, the debt ceiling, which the U.S. is set to hit sometime between January 14th and the 23rd, which is subject to change, as always, depending on the timing of inlays and outlays at the Treasury. But it could fall during the final days of the Biden administration or first days of the second Trump administration. So some very intense housekeeping there. Then, of course, the new president will put maximum pressure on the new Republican Senate majority to confirm his cabinet nominees. And incoming Majority Leader John Thune of South Dakota said this week that the attack in New Orleans underscored the need to get Trump's national security team in particular confirmed ASAP. But as for issues, Steve, Republicans are obviously eager to address the southern border, restrict the flow of migrants. Also renewing the 2017 Trump tax cuts is on a lot of Republicans' wish lists, but so is reducing the deficit. So there's going to have to be some give and take there, right? You can't cut taxes without cutting spending, and cutting spending isn't always popular. So remember, Republicans are going to have majorities, but they're not necessarily powerful majorities. In the House, it'll be one of the slimmest in about a century. And in the Senate, the filibuster is still in place. So Republicans will have to compromise with Democrats if they want to get major legislation down Pennsylvania Avenue to Trump's desk.
Only a few days into the new year and a lot on the plate of Washington and Washington lawmakers. Audra, Christine, Matt, thanks for your hard work. Back to you.
Up next year, the bird flu detected in chickens in Ohio. The action farmers need to take if they see certain symptoms in their flock. Plus, a lucky lottery player in California wins $1 billion jackpot. What people in their small town had to say about the big win. This is the National News Desk, America's News Now. We have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering issues that matter to you. From Amazon workers going back to the office in Washington to a lucky lottery winner in California, we're taking the pulse of America, but we start with new bird flu cases detected in Ohio.
We take all the necessary precautions to make sure there's no infected product that leaves that premise.
The ODA says the virus was found in the poultry last Friday. All of the infected chickens were found at a single farm. Ohio State veterinarian Dr. Dennis Summers says symptoms include not eating or drinking as much, discoloration to the face or head, and being lethargic.
And amongst, our commercial poultry and turkey, it's highly infectious and highly fatal, right? So it does move through poultry populations relatively swiftly.
Dr. Summers says no products that have left the farm were contaminated. He explained to me the next steps and top priorities.
Our activities right now are focused on containing the virus on the premise right now and making sure that we're following the procedures in order to get the birds depopulated and then get them properly disposed of, all while not further transmitting that virus off of the farm.
A survey of Amazon employees when the new back-to-office policy was announced found 9 out of 10 dissatisfied with it, according to Blind.
I've heard from many other colleagues that they don't want to come.
But Hardik Chug tells me he's okay with it.
I like to come to office 5 days a week because at home, I kind of feel like I'm not that much productive to be at home.
Like the office space is really good, and I do feel that I'm productive here too.
Even though Amazonians lined up at local food trucks for lunch, those local businesses still not back to their pre-pandemic business.
We definitely look forward to them coming back 5 days a week. I understand that's not going to be convenient for everybody, but as far as our industry goes, it is going to be a big boost.
I'm still stunned that it happened here in Cottonwood. Absolutely stunned. It's amazing.
One small purchase has led to a huge victory for a Mega Millions ticket buyer out of Shasta County. On Friday, California lottery representatives announced the winning $1.22 billion Mega Millions ticket was sold at Circle K Sunshine Food and Gas on Rhonda Road in Cottonwood, with all 6 numbers on that ticket matching the drawing. Locals have a message for whomever it is.
Way to do it, man. I hope you live the rest of your life in peace and happiness, just right off into the sunset. Forget this podunk town.
And still ahead here, the new year means a new rule when flying, what you need to have to make it through airport security starting this May. A single cigarette cuts about 20 minutes off your life expectancy. That's according to a new study out of England. Researchers at University College London estimated the loss of life expectancy per cigarette at about 17 minutes for men and 22 for women. That means a pack of 20 cigarettes per day works out to be nearly 7 hours of life loss per pack. Researchers found on average people who smoked throughout their lives lost about 10 years of life compared with people who never smoked. Requirements to fly domestically will change for travelers starting in May of next year. You'll need a real ID if you want to get past security. That's unless you have a passport or an enhanced driver's license issued by several states. The deadline is May 7th. You can apply for your real ID compliant driver's license or ID card through your local Department of Motor Vehicles. And NASA is now monitoring a growing anomaly in Earth's magnetic field. Researchers say the South Atlantic anomaly is located between South America and Africa. It creates no visible impacts for daily life on Earth. But they say the changes to Earth's magnetic field could cause future challenges for satellites and humans in space. That'll be all for us on the weekend edition of the National News Desk, America's News Now. Don't forget, you can catch us live from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. Check your local listings. You can also watch us online and catch up with the latest headlines on thenationaldesk.com. Thanks for watching the weekend edition of the National News Desk. I'm Dee Dee Gatton, and from all of us here, have a great week.